Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the Virtual Baker Institute and another of the Center for Energy Studies, Energy, Minerals, and Materials webinars. I'm very pleased to have joining us today Theo Yameogo, a colleague with EY, which is one of our longstanding supporters of the CES, and will tell you about himself, but he's the new co-leader for Americas for mining for EY, and also the co-leader in Canada. And he can correct me if I've miscued on the titles. Prior to our webinar, we had a separate roundtable discussion with a really wonderful group on a very particular challenge when it comes to resource frontiers, and that is seabed mining and minerals extraction. It was a robust discussion. This is not an easy topic. There are lots of different views. The resources, there are no questions about that in terms of existence, ability to capture them, and other things. The issues are, as usual, the devil's in the details of how to achieve it. Beyond our territorial waters, of course, there is the matter of the common area, deep sea areas that are managed under the UN, very complicated environment to be in terms of policy and coordination and other things. And I also want to say that while a lot of our conversation dealt with critical minerals that we know are coming to the fore for alternative energy technologies, what we are very much concerned with is sustaining materials flows for all of the economic activities that humans engage in around the world. Every industrial consumer product involves at least two major streams, plastics and metals. The question is where the metals are going to come from, what sources, what locations, with what economics, and then, how to do all of this in the most responsible and sustainable way, so long as we can define that word sustainability and what it actually means. So having Theo here to join us as the EY Mining and Metals leader is such a privilege. Theo, what I would like to do for a few minutes is just have you tell the audience a bit about yourself, and then we'll talk a little bit about the global mining and metals industries, the Americas version of that, to provide some overall context for this notion of resource frontiers, where we will get the new and greenfield opportunities. Where will those be located?
Thank you. So the first thing is, I like to always tell people that I'm a geologist and a mining engineer. I also have a PhD in rock mechanics and mining engineering. So I do understand the technical aspects of mining and metals, and I've worked on every continent so far to do with mining and metals. And I've done different sorts of commodities too. When I joined EY was to support and grow our mining and metals practice in the Americas, because the firm is committed to the energy transition, and we want to make sure we're helping our clients accordingly. So that's basically my background.
Thank you. So let's talk about this. I used this slide earlier to introduce the roundtable. It's basically my working slide for our program within the Center for Energy Studies. All of the large hoppers of things that we have to think about when it comes to minerals and materials, starting with the upstream, which is the message that I carry all the time. All value chains begin upstream. We can't talk about anything else unless we're actually able to obtain the inputs, the feedstocks that we need. And as we go all the way around this, of course, there are hosts of challenges. You're gonna talk later specifically about one of them, one of the specific challenges in this bundle of things that we call ESG. But when you look at the global industry and you look at this set of realities, how do you see things? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? How do you see the mining industry today? And sort of starting with our backyard, I guess, our countries, and then moving on from there.
So the sentiment is that we will finally understand the value of mining as we move into energy transition, because low carbon economy means that mining and metals have to be leveraged much higher to actually help us get to this, carbon neutral world that we all aspiring to. Recently, Wood Mackenzie published that we need about $1 trillion of investment in mining and metals to just make sure we can get enough aluminum, copper, nickel, cobalt, iron ore to actually support that. So the sentiment is actually positive. Where there's an interesting twist is in your second bullet, where you talk about, how do we attend to the supply chain, the economic environment, geopolitical security risk, and also the last one on responsive development and use. There are basically two pressures. Well, there's actually one pressure, but one opportunity. The opportunity is really that, oh yeah, money is going to be more in need. People are going to suddenly understand that, all these technology they're using require a lot of mining. That's positive news. So mining companies are excited about that. And then we expect there's going to be new entrant into the sector. At EY, we did a mining 2040 scenario plans for the sector. And one scenario is that it's going to be so profitable that new companies are going to come in, or companies may actually vertically integrate so that they can, close that gap between the sourcing and the production. So that's one. Now, the pressure is really that nobody is willing to give mining and metals a free pass to just get the minerals at any cost. Mm-hmm. Because, we all entered into this new thinking of low carbon economy, and it means not only things we use, but also how we get the things to our, table, how we get the things to our houses. So that's where there's a dichotomy where, yeah, there's the opportunity, but it's not at any cost.
So how do you see this playing out in when it comes to conventional onshore mining operations in the Americas and then beyond?
Well, when we talk about the Americas, we always have to split between Canada, US versus the rest of the Americas. Not that it's like worse or not. It's just that these issues are different. When you talk about Canada and US, the challenges are always around permitting. Okay, we have a big client, copper producer. Copper is part of the critical minerals, but they were denied the permit in Arizona about 2 years ago, right? And they're back at it, trying to get it done. So that's permitting is one. The second one is really on communities, but it's different. It's communities as in, do people even want to have mines in their backyard, or are we really doing enough consultation with First Nations and Aboriginal communities? Because ultimately they were on that land way before all of us, right? So that's the second aspect that is being discussed. The third one in the north part of the America is really around the fuel that we use, because mining consumes a lot of energy. And the question is, should we make sure that mining is using more environmental friendly energy, like more solar, more hydro and things like that? And Quebec, for example, is known to be a big hydro country, like hydro electricity producer. So the question is, will Quebec be more interesting a place to mine because they have hydropower than, let's say, Ontario, where we have less hydro and more nuclear and other things. So that's on the north side. That's the challenges on the north side. Now, the opportunity on the north side is that we do have the EV companies, right? So we are the end state. You talk about end of life. It's not end of life yet, but we are the end state of the production chain. So if I'm Tesla, GM, Ford, or Chrysler, I want to have that source closer to me, because then the supply chain disruption is minimal, right? So that's on that. On the south side, we do have more lithium, for example, in South America, lots more, but it's in very pristine environment. And the question is whether or not it's going to be mined. We're talking Chile, Bolivia, Argentina. And then we also have a big F challenge. Historically, they've been mining in South America by large corporations, but there's been two problems. One is that some governments were paid royalty and everything, but the community didn't see it. So in that, I think about like Peru, where there's problems in like some of the mining companies. I'm not gonna name them, but they're operating in areas where people don't want to see mining, no matter what. They don't even want the money anymore. They just don't want mining. Period. And then we have the tailings dam failure in Brazil, where people start seeing mining as, wow, this is too dangerous. And then how we're gonna deal with it. And the third one is really the distance. If you think about low carbon economy, and we talked about it in the previous session, transportation is key. And if you take something, even if it's very good and low price, and you take it and put it on ships, you're actually increasing the carbon footprint of that good thing. Let's say it's lithium. And by the time it hits North America, you might have destroyed the value of sourcing it in South America in terms of carbon footprint. So in America, these are the dichotomies. I mean, these are the difference between the North and the South. We as EY, we're trying to close the gap by making sure that we transferring the knowledge both sides and making sure it works out. For example, we have the America's Mining Metals Forum, which you heard of before, that is coming up, and we're making sure that on ESG, for example, we're gonna have some South American executives talk about how they view it, and then we're gonna blend them with like the North American executives talk about how we do it here, and try to close the gap and make it a true corridor.
When EY is a global company, so you have mining and metals operation business units and leaders all over the world. So when you take the Americas and you look at the differences north and south and what the mining industry is faced with here, is it true around the world, the rest of the world, and do you see differences in terms of how does that affect? For instance, where the industry chooses to operate, where do they pursue opportunities? How does it play out in the bigger picture?
With time, when it comes to ESG, with time, the world is leveling up. Like the rules are starting to become the same. Because we have the transparency group at the international level. We have the FCA in the UK, the SEC in the US, and the OSC in Canada, asking for the same level of scrutiny, whether you operate in North America, South America, or anywhere else. So we're starting to see closing the gap in terms of what's good and what's not good. So that is less and less interesting. Now, there's still going to be a certain level of comfort if you have a full executive team that grew up in Toronto and never seen, let's say, I don't know, I'll pick where I grew up, let's say Burkina, never seen Burkina Faso. Well, then they may not be comfortable going in and starting something in Burkina because they have no clue what they're dealing with. So you may get these things, but typically the companies that are listed, talking about listed companies, they are bound by the same requirement no matter where they operate. And that's something that I think is positive. And I think it makes this transition low economy easier because it's not going to be like a big surprise. Mining companies are actually fully aware of what requirements they need to abide by no matter where they operate.
Great. And then let me ask you quickly, given the discussion that we just had about marine minerals and the potential for this frontier resource to come into the picture. I know you've got, you've got mixed views on it. So can you just put that in context with this global set of conditions that's evolving for the mining and metals businesses? Is it better? Is it worse? Is it too soon to tell? Or the particular sets of risks associated with offshore minerals Are they, can they be dealt with in a systematic way? How do you fit that into the picture?
Um, I can take two or three examples of that happened in the past to just, paint the picture before I say what I'm about to say. Um, when back in like 2005, I think, or even before that, when we were trying to see that, okay, we're gonna run out of, we were not even talking about low carbon economy. We just knew that we're gonna run out of metals. There was a company that was created to go mine the asteroids. I don't know if you remember that. Like that's like, and then and everybody got
Retaining
excited.
yourselves, but I do remember it.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody started getting excited about it, but then it got nowhere. So that's one thing I know. And I remember I met the CEO and he told me about what he's gonna do, and I remember that. And then that's one data point. The second data point is that the mining industry has a long memory, and whether we wanted or not, Nautilus Minerals wasn't the best case of marine mining that they've seen.
Mhm.
The third point is that with the pressure on ESG, we had there were some exits, and I think I have somewhere in my some investors left coal mining because they just don't feel it's low carbon anymore. So they have a new framework in the investment world. They have a new framework where they can analyze every project and fund them depending on whether or not they consciously believe that this is ESG driven or not. So based on these things, and based on the fact that mining is risky anyway, and based on the fact that you cannot mine without coming across communities or government, that's not possible. It's always going to be one or the other you're going to come across that may or may not like you. Based on all of that, and the discussion we had earlier, I just think it's too early to call whether or not marine mining is going to take off before the 2030, 2050 timeframe where we need those minerals.
Mhm.
It might take off at some point. I believe in innovation. I believe that the humans always come up with great ways to get things done. But I also believe that we are more and more sophisticated as humans compared to, let's say, 50, 100 years ago. There are some things that we don't tolerate anymore. I don't know, 1,000 years ago was okay that if you needed something for your neighbor, you just knock them down, take it and go. Today, we know that's not possible. And today, we also know that, okay, we're not just going to mine for the sake of mining. And because of all of the reasons, it's going to be harder to get to that level of mining marine minerals in the next 10 years.
Interesting. And let me just clarify for this audience that when we talk about marine minerals, what we're talking about are seabed resources. I'm sure many people have heard of these nodules of manganese and other minerals. The opportunity to extract more than one mineral, which makes it attractive in many respects, not only in territorial waters, but in the deep sea under in the common areas, as we refer to it, that is under the United Nations. And so that's generally what we're talking about when we talk about marine minerals. And we do have projects that are underway in territorial waters subject to the rules and regulations of those countries. So that's the, in contrast to the image that we're showing here, which is a classic open pit metals mine. And that is where the interest lies. Is there an opportunity to do something that in some respects is less obvious? It's certainly, not on land and so therefore not as easily accessible, but presents its own challenges in terms of seafloor environmental seafloor ecosystems and the effects on those ecosystems, as well as multiple uses of coastal areas and the open seas themselves. So all of that is extremely, interesting, but certainly, will require a lot. So let's swing into now some of the realities that the mining industry faces, and one in particular that that you are going to talk about today, and that's the trend for decarbonizing in mining and metals, because this is the expectation. The expectation is that if we're going to move to alternative energy technologies, which are going to have very distinct requirements in terms of metals, minerals inputs, associated supply chains, and all of those things, all of those considerations, that we have to be able to do it at least as well as our legacy energy businesses. So this is creating new pressures on the mining industry to get with the program, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that a little bit. Let you lay the groundwork there, and then we'll see what questions come up. There already are some, but so let's see how this is going to work.
Okay, cool. If you go to the next slide. So every year for the last 13 or 14 years now, we've been publishing the top 10 risk and opportunities for mining and metals. And this is the one of last year, so right deep into COVID. And you can see the license to operate is still there. In the past, we used to call it social license to operate. Mm-hmm. But what we discovered is that there's no such thing as social license to operate. It's just a license to operate. Because sometimes you may get the community okay, but the government may say no, or you may get both of them okay, and the investor world says no, they don't want your product. So license to operate is still one of the biggest issue. And if you look at this top 10 risk here, there's a lot to do with ESG. It doesn't spell it out specifically, but license to operate has something to do with ESG. High impact risk has something to do with ESG. On high impact risk, for example, we had the COVID impacts as one, but we also had like tailings management. We have nationalism, which is actually part of geopolitics. If you think about decarbonization, that's there. That's like spelled out. It's all about how you reduce the carbon footprint of your mining to basically mine to port or mine to client, depending on what kind of integration the company has. And of course, you think about geopolitics. We talked about this in the previous session. Some of the position people are taking is really for national interest. How do we make sure that we have less exposure to foreign countries that are controlling certain minerals? So what we notice is that there's a lot of groups that are working to make sure that mining and metals goes towards the net zero. There's a lot of announcement by mining companies that they're going towards net zero. COP26 is coming up, and we expect that with COP26 aligned with what the SEC has been publishing recently, there's going to be a requirement to actually understand the carbon footprint of a mining operation and to also report and be investigated if you actually don't report it. So the same way we do bribery and corruption, the same way we will actually start paying attention to decarbonization. Mm-hmm. Do you want me to go all the way and then we talk, or?
Oh, whatever you prefer. One thing that I was going to bring up, though, when we look at mining itself, so the extraction as opposed to processing, we've got different realities in terms of emissions.
Yes. So again, like I said, I'm a mining engineer, so I spent a lot of years designing those mines and working in them in the operation. So the way we look at it from the mining side is really around the impacted environment, the dirt we're moving, the tailings we're creating, but also, there's a lot of equipment, and most of these equipment, because we're in a foreign, actually not just foreign, we're just in remote area. Even in Arizona, the mines are not closer to the city; they're remote. We end up using diesel or heavy fuel oil. And when we're underground, we rarely, like recently, there's some mining companies that are using electric, but we rarely have electric. So there's an impact there. And for underground mining, for example, ventilation is a big energy consumer because gonna ventilate underground for people to stay alive. And depending on where you are, which country you are, or which region you're in, you may end up using a lot of coal. Fired power plant to get the energy, or you may actually have to use diesel, right? So on the extraction side, there's a lot of these aspects of, okay, how do we reduce that footprint? And then on the processing side, processing is basically a plant. So again, you use a lot of energy, and the energy varies, depending on where you are and what kind of system you have in place. But then around it, there's other aspects of energy that comes into play, because you got to supply, like let's say explosives, you have to supply trucks. So you driving all of these inputs into the mine, like reagent, and those are also carbon intensive, like in terms of getting it there. So that's where the scope 3 aspects come in.
Mhm.
And then you can go on and go on that. And then similar on the processing plant, and then you go to the smelter level, where smelters tend to not be far from cities. You may be using lots of water, um, or not, depending on what you're smelting, before you actually get to the end product.
Very good.
This slide here is really around the fact that, remember I was saying in the beginning that it's getting global. It's
Yep.
not it's not just factfulness was saying. It's not just the 2 billion people making all the calls here. Actually, everybody is paying attention to it. So in Africa, for example, many countries are looking at greenhouse gas reduction. And typically it's going to be manufacturing or mining. This is the two that actually consume a lot. Same in Asia. And of course, we have with the Biden administration, we have, and we've seen him yesterday in the UK. There's more and more discussion about realigning these things. And of course, South America, we having it's not official yet, but it's potentially Peru might vote a left, like extreme left president, who's planning on nationalizing all the mining resources and dealing with different. Peru is the number 2 copper producer, so we expect that if that does happen, price of copper will even shoot up even more.
Mm. Well, and those are always risks and have long
Yes.
been risks in the business. But to your point, as issues become globalized, practices have to follow.
Yeah,
Correct?
and yes, and the discussion around blockchain has been very interesting for the last 3-5 years. There have been a lot of startups that come in. I mean, when I was in the industry recently, I was approached by a two blockchain companies to try to get us to adopt it for copper production, and that was before all this energy transition discussion that we're having right now. So there is a lot of that will actually reduce the customer risk, because we are, whether we want or not, North America, in particular in Europe, are very picky customer when it comes to ESG. This is where we see more and more customer advocacy to try to make sure they know where things are coming from. We've seen it with Apple and some of the position they've taken, and we expect to see it more and more. We expect to see Tesla users asking more questions around how they get the parts into the car. We think that there could be a future where people basically walk around the car scanning parts of the car and seeing where it came from. And that is going to have a big impact on how mining is done, right? Because then suddenly the mining sector needs to make sure that they have that system in place where they can tell people where things came from. So that's another one. On the emission front, you can see here some public companies that came out, and this is already old. I mean, we got like at least 5 every month companies coming in and saying they're going to be net zero, and then and sometimes we don't know exactly what they're going to do to be net zero, but the commitment is there, and then they work backwards to get there. Now, what we believe is that the SEC might actually enforce this anyway. So whether you say it or not, you may still have to do it at some point. And then discussion around carbon offsets is one. How do you deal with carbon credit? And maybe you have operations that are in North America that have certain carbon footprint, and then you have operations that are in, let's say, Ghana, have certain carbon footprint. Because you're going to transfer the material, you need to figure out a way to offset it. Maybe companies will start buying shares into and producing companies like Tesla or GM or BMW or Volkswagen, so that they can actually reduce. But there's going to be a lot of balancing act for the mining companies to make sure they're ready. We've seen a lot of divestiture of contracts that were tied to coal or diesel. For example, and I remember about 4 years ago, one big mining company wrote off 700 million of contracts that they had with coal producers, and then they wrote it off because there's no way you can get it back. And then they started building renewable plants by the mines so that they can use solar and wind. I was personally involved with my previous company before I came back to EY on assessing whether or not we can have a solar farm, where we're going to put the solar farm, what's the value, can we give it to the community? Because there's other things there, like if you were to build a renewable plant, because it's only used for a certain portion of the day, you could actually start sharing with the community. And it's like a good unintended consequence of going renewable.
Very interesting. And of course, well, I could ask this question. This is a tough question, but to what you said earlier, is there a risk for companies of making net zero commitments and then not being able to meet them?
Yes.
Since they have to work backwards in order to be able to accomplish it?
Yeah, I think some management teams will lose their jobs. That's a certainty. Yes, 100%. It's a bit. I don't know if you remember the CSR era where everybody needed to have a corporate social responsibility department, and they were gonna do this and do that, and then didn't work out, and some people end up having to go into different industry or maybe change the company. I believe that the industry does not everybody in the industry actually understands the impact of going carbon neutral, especially in an era where the industry is being asked to produce more.
Yes, that is a very important point. Crucial point. So you have an example here of what some actions are, and certainly, people can see this. Any particular comments on, especially to that point of how to balance commitments with also production targets?
Yeah, so there's a concept in mining that I just want to touch on it so that people see how crazy it is. It's the concept of cutoff grade. A cutoff grade is an artificially set limit on how low of the concentration of minerals you're going to extract. And this cutoff grade is based on basically your internal cost of capital, the price of the commodity in the market, and it's what mining engineers know inside out. So, for example, if lithium, say, is at $1,000 a pound, then you may be able to extract or move out into a pressing plant like tons of rock that are maybe, let's say 100 parts per million. Okay. If the cutoff grade doubles, you'll probably be able to move stuff that are like 50 parts per million. So you're moving more dirt depending on the price going up. And in this current era, we believe that the price is going to go up. So mining companies are going to have to adjust the cutoff grade, which means that they're going to produce more tons, which also means they're going to produce more waste, which means they're going to have larger tailings because the system is linear. Like it's everything you change impacts everything else. And it also means they're going to make more money. And that context is really, okay, copper mines and everything is going to change. Now, there's a good news about it. And I know we touched lightly on it, and I wish we had a session just on recycling. The good news around recycling and reprocessing. So tailings, because of the cutoff grade, some tailings are actually rich. If you look at the copper price today or the nickel price today, they're rich because we dump stuff in there that we believe were not economic, but the price changed so much that it's economic now. So the question is, should mining be enticed to actually mine the waste that they already produce as part of some sort of recycling or circular economy philosophy? And then the other question is, I know we can't recycle all the metals for the sake of the EVs because the EVs are very purity hungry. Like it's really, it doesn't like recycling material. But can we do something else with that? You know, we know that, for example, like if you look at your house, there's some stuff that are recycled there for a lower use, like a lower grade use, rather than the higher grade use that you needed. And I think that's going to be another interesting thing. And on this slide, the most important piece for me is data. Is really understanding what's going on. You know, once you have the data, you know, the analytics you can figure out, setting the targets because you actually know what you have. So understand the carbon footprint, like your colleague Rachel, was talking about, the life cycle analysis of really what's going on is really going to be key, but we need the data.
This is very data hungry, that's for sure. And then let's see, I think you have one more.
Yeah,
or
that was it.
This is simply the end here. So now having said all of this, let's go back to the thesis that we can extract minerals from the seabed and ask how, you know, when you look at these criteria, I mean, clearly what you've got is an effort to try to build a new industry, or at least a new part of the extractive industry. There are many things that it can take advantage of in terms of existing technologies and all of that. But we have these realities of expectations that clearly are going to extend to marine minerals, right? So there's no way to do this. There's no way to think about greenfield opportunities in seabed mining without also thinking about everything else that's going on in the mining industry. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, 100%. The interesting. So the CEO of Anglo American was doing a keynote in the beginning of May, and he was saying that by calling things mining, because you know it's historical, we always called it mining because that's how we saw it. We actually underestimate the impact that what all it is about minerals and metals. That's really what it's about. The mining piece is just one activity that actually omits the fact that you're doing exploration, you're doing a lot of pilot plants, testing, and then you're moving stuff around. So when I'm not aware of any country that has regulation particularly made for one type of mining. They have regulation made for minerals and metals and how you extract them. Typically, they say extraction industry. So I see it applying to the deep sea mining. I also believe that at some point we will have to try it. I just know that based on how we do mining on land, it may take a lot of time before we get all the policies and regulation in place and how we mine it. But it is definitely an innovative way to look at things. The questions are always going to be, how much disruption are we doing in the sea? That'll be the question. Is it the same? Are we making the sea into a big tailing pond? Like, these are questions that need to be answered. But once they're answered, it's gonna be different. And also politically it's different, right? Because not everybody will have deep sea mining. We know that they're mostly in like North Pacific. So some countries are gonna have more vested interest than others.
We've got a couple of interesting questions. One of them is very timely, and I don't know whether you're going to be comfortable answering this, but not only in the United States, but also China and also Europe. Everyone is trying to figure out how to build the right kind of relationship with China, which is a dominant player in all of these businesses. And if something were to happen that would affect anything that we rely on Chinese supply chains for, whether for raw materials or for components, batteries themselves, or other equipment, telecoms, any other industrial or consumer product that we use. If we go back to the beginning of our conversation and we look at the Americas, can we make up the difference? I mean, we've had previous conversations about mining in Canada, mining in the United States. It's very difficult. In fact, I would have to say that as of today, I can't think of a project in the United States, a new mining venture that is able to proceed. I mean, they're not licensed. You mentioned the one in Arizona earlier. We've got a opposition to lithium in Nevada, to nickel in the Great Lakes region, to copper in Arizona, to a variety of different things. And so, how do we meet our own requirements if we can't get on the same page with a major supplier like the Chinese? I mean, how do we think about that?
So I love history. So I usually just go back to history and try to figure out, is this something new or have we seen this before? And of course we've seen this before. We've always seen this. The world is never at the same speed on everything. And it's just life. There was a time, and I'll mention it, but I hope you're good with. But there was a time when there was a surplus of corn in the U.S. and the U.S. created, funneled the corn through USA to feed kids in Africa, and I was on the receiving end of that. In Burkina, I grew up eating that USA corn because it was in excess. Where the African country not think, oh, we exposed, there was famine in Ethiopia and places like that. So I'm just taking a different example to just say that the world is not going to have everything all at once. It's not going to happen. And that is the reason why we call some things natural resources versus other things. And it doesn't matter how bad we want it, but if you don't have the resources in your ground, well, that's it. Like you have to negotiate with the others, just like through rules of economics, and then figure out a way or how you're going to trade. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think trade forces the humans to do less fighting. Usually they trade to a point and then they start fighting. That's a different story. But it forces the humans to actually do less fighting and realize that they need each other. That's how I look at it.
It's a very optimistic view of the world. By the way, I have to say, and since you've told this story again, it meant a lot to me when you shared that with me before, because I did USAID work for many years. And so, we had this slogan for the American people, and there you are. It was really from the American. Another question that came up, which you didn't mention earlier, the S part of the ESG and the benefits to countries that have minerals resources, including in their territorial waters, and also want to do the value added. Where do you see that in the scheme of things? Is there growing pressure on the mining industry to develop more content in the countries where they're doing business, whether for processing, and of course, you could extend that to manufacturing ambitions that countries have, but that's a separate issue. I mean, that wouldn't be something that the mining industry would do, but certainly, the next stages of processing and refining, are there pressures on the industry to do that?
Yeah, so there always been pressures, and as every economy gets sophisticated, people realize that the mining is just one piece, and the manufacturing of the product is actually more value add and creates more of an industrial economy, because mining can be present and you should not get an industrial economy like you. So, for example, I know that Newfoundland, there was a big nickel deposit that, like Jesus, like nearly 20 years more now. And then the premier said, no, if you don't build a plant here, we're not going to approve it.
Yep.
And then the company, it was Inco back then, they actually end up agreeing to build a plant. And now they're going underground because they have more that they can extract. So they're staying there. Mm-hmm. If they didn't build a plant, they may not actually do that.
Right. They actually have a place to process that additional volume.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I expect that there's a battery metals conference I'm moderating next week, and in a prep meeting, there's a bunch of CEOs of like graphite companies and EV companies, and one person already said that Quebec does not want any of the battery metals or minerals to leave the province. without being processed to a level of use in the car. And this is kind of in a US level, right? So can you believe how other people may think about it in terms of, okay, do I just let people extract the lithium and go, or do I force people to actually extract the lithium to a level of purity that when it's going, the value is much higher? Because at the end of the day, and you and I talked about taxation, the way taxation works is really weird, right? Because it's the value of the product you're extracting and exporting. So if you export at the lithium concentrate level, it's less valuable than if you actually create high purity nickel and lithium that you close to put in the manufacturing system. The other thing that may happen, because mining is just one piece, is really would an EV company actually decide to go build a plant in those countries? Because at the end of the day, the consumption of the EV, yes, going to be great in the Western world, but it's going to be even greater in the rest of the world if everybody, because it's by the size of the population. So if I'm an EV company and I go and set up a shop in, say, Chile or Argentina or Bolivia, because I want to be close to the supply chain because it's so critical, well, then there's no discussion. Then I don't really need to think about processing because I already set up the manufacturing there. So that's how I think the S will play. And it's also that the generations are less and less interested in just having a mining job. They really want, the techie job. They know about technology. Everybody's connected through Facebook and Instagram and wherever people are using. So even the next generation of population is not really interested in just driving a truck. They're interested in the more valuable activities.
Very interesting comments. So let me ask this question in closing. It's a tough one. When you think about all of that, you think about how the landscape is changing with regard to ESG and related practices, and you look at experiences in places like Quebec and Newfoundland and other countries where there are so many ambitions to try to achieve economic development. The question is, can ESG actually help win public support? Do you see that? I have to say that for me it's tough, because I in looking at a lot of projects that I've been close to over the years, for all the efforts that companies have made to try to point out everything that they would do to operate safely and responsibly and everything else. If the public is opposed, it's a tough message. And then when you think about the second part of that, if the economic benefits, which can that help win things over? So how do these things play out in terms of building public support? Can they really?
Yeah, that's a tough question.
It's a tough question.
Yeah, I think. So the first thing I'll say is really the education of the masses around where they're getting what they're getting. Is key. I was talking to my neighbor not long ago, and he was asking me what we mine in Ontario, right? And I was like, okay, that's weird. Like, you should know, because we like a big mining province. And I think this is gonna be the first one, is actually explaining to people where they're getting some of the things they're getting. People still don't know that when they're walking with a laptop or with a phone, some of the elements are rare earth element. Like, they don't even know that. And then they don't know what it takes to get it to them. So that's the first one. And this is actually what I could use to answer the second one, is like, if you're a mining company, you can do all the right ESG stuff and invest in it and do it right. But you can still have somebody on the other side of the table that doesn't understand all the effort you put in.
Yes, that's a very good point.
So I find that's going to be definitely a civilizational question that you're asking, because I don't really know if people will ever appreciate what it takes to actually get minerals out into places. I'm not too sure.
Yeah, well, that's a good note on which to leave, and it's one that we're going to need to take up later and as we follow up. Theo, thank you so much for the extra time and for sharing all of your unique perspectives with us today. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope that you enjoy your summer up there and get really good results from all of your initiatives at EY. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Michelle, and thanks for the Baker Institute and every system that you guys working on. I think we need to really keep the thinking going. Every civilization always made sure there's think tanks that actually look at things deeper, and I'm really glad that you guys are doing it. It's great.
Oh, thanks a bunch. Appreciate the vote of confidence. All right, farewell, everyone. Have a great day and a great weekend, and we will see all of you at the next event.